The smell of my mother's famous lasagna filled the dining room, but tonight, it couldn't mask the tension that had been suffocating our family for weeks. I sat at the polished mahogany table where we'd shared countless Sunday dinners, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for my water glass. Emma sat beside me, her presence both comforting and terrifying as I prepared for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. The October evening had settled over our suburban Cleveland home, casting long shadows through the bay windows. Mom moved mechanically between the kitchen and dining room, her usual warmth replaced by an uncomfortable stiffness. Dad carved the garlic bread with surgical precision, his jaw set in that familiar way that meant he was barely containing his emotions. My younger sister Jessica kept glancing between Emma and me, clearly sensing the undercurrent of tension that threatened to explode at any moment. "So, Emma," Dad said suddenly, his voice artificially cheerful, "what do you do for work again?" I felt Emma's hand brush mine under the table, a subtle gesture of support that somehow made everything feel both better and worse. She'd insisted on coming tonight despite my protests, despite knowing that my parents had been cold to her during our brief introduction at the front door. "I'm a graphic designer at Morrison & Associates downtown," Emma replied, with the same professional smile she used with difficult clients. Her auburn hair caught the light from the chandelier, and I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she looked, even in this impossible situation. "That's nice," Mom said without looking up from her plate, her words clipped and distant. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times, but now that we were here, surrounded by the familiar comfort of home, every word I'd planned seemed inadequate. The family photos on the sideboard seemed to mock me. Images of birthday parties, graduations, Christmas mornings where everything felt simple and safe. "Dad," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something important." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mom's breathing became audibly shallow. Jessica stopped pretending to eat and fixed her eyes on me with a mixture of curiosity and dread. "I know you've been wondering about Emma and me, about why I asked to bring her to family dinner." The words felt like sandpaper in my throat. "We're not just friends. We're together. We've been together for 8 months. And I love her." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking each agonizing second, the sound of Mrs. Peterson's dog barking next door, the distant hum of traffic on Maple Street. Everything felt hyper-real, as if I were watching this scene unfold from outside my own body. Dad set down his fork with deliberate care, the small clink against the plate somehow thunderous. His face had gone pale, then flushed red, cycling through emotions I'd never seen him display. "No," he said simply. "Dad, please listen." "No." His voice was rising now. 25 years of Sunday sermons about traditional values and moral righteousness pouring into that single syllable. "This is not happening in my house." Emma's hand found mine above the table now, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of defiance and love that made my heart race. I could feel her trembling too, but she sat straighter, meeting my father's gaze with quiet dignity. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice steady despite the storm brewing around us. "I understand this might be difficult to hear, but I care deeply about Sarah. We care about each other." Dad's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as he stood abruptly, his napkin falling to the ground like a white flag of surrender. His face was a mask of rage and pain that I'd never seen before, not even during his angriest sermons about sin and redemption. "This is an abomination," he said, his voice shaking. "Everything I've taught you, everything we've raised you to believe, you're throwing it away for this sinful lifestyle." "Richard," Mom whispered, her voice breaking. "No, Linda, I won't pretend this is acceptable. I won't sit at my own table and watch my daughter mock everything sacred." He turned to me, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it made my chest ache. "You have a choice to make, Sarah. You can end this nonsense and come back to the path God intended for you, or you can walk away from this family forever." The ultimatum hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Jessica gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. Mom began to cry quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at her empty plate. Emma's grip on my hand tightened, and I could feel her pulse racing through her fingertips. "Dad, please don't do this," I said, standing to face him across the table that had once symbolized everything good about our family. "I'm still your daughter. I'm still the same person who helped you with your sermons, who sang in the church choir, who—" "You are not the daughter I raised," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of the dining room. The daughter I raised would never choose this perversion over her family's love and God's plan. That's when Emma stood up too, her chair sliding back with a sharp scrape. Her face was flushed, her green eyes blazing with an anger I'd rarely seen from her gentle nature. She picked up her wine glass, holding it like she was making a toast. "You want to talk about God's plan?" she said, her voice clear and strong. "You want to talk about love and family?" She looked directly at my father, unflinching in the face of his rage. "I love your daughter more than anything in this world. I would die for her, protect her, cherish her for the rest of my life. If that's not what family is supposed to be about, then maybe your version of love isn't worth having." And then she slammed the glass down on the table with such force that it shattered, sending wine and glass shards across the pristine white tablecloth. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden silence, final and irreversible. "You're no longer my daughter," Dad said quietly, his voice broken and terrible. "If you walk out that door with her, don't ever come back." I looked around the table at the wreckage of my family. Mom was sobbing openly now, her face buried in her hands. Jessica stared at the broken glass with wide, shocked eyes. Emma stood beside me, her hand still in mine, blood trickling from a small cut where a shard had nicked her finger. And my father stood at the head of the table like a patriarch from the Old Testament, delivering judgment with the weight of absolute certainty. In that moment, I realized that some choices change everything, that some words can never be taken back, and that sometimes love requires us to lose everything else we've ever known. "Then I guess this is goodbye," I said, my voice surprisingly steady as I grabbed my purse from the back of my chair. Emma and I walked toward the front door together, our footsteps echoing in the hallway lined with family portraits that would now serve as monuments to what we used to be. As we reached the front door, I heard Jessica call out behind us. "Sarah, wait!" I turned to see my little sister running down the hallway, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around me in a fierce hug that smelled like the vanilla perfume she'd worn since high school. "I don't care what Dad says," she whispered in my ear. "You'll always be my sister. Always." She pressed a piece of paper into my hand, her phone number written in purple ink, before running back toward the dining room where I could hear Mom's muffled sobs and the sound of Dad's heavy breathing. Emma and I stepped out into the cool October night, leaving behind the warm glow of the house that had been my sanctuary for 24 years. As we walked toward her car parked under the street lamp, I looked back once at the dining room window where I could see the silhouettes of my parents still frozen in their positions at the table. The broken glass would be cleaned up, the wine stains would eventually fade from the tablecloth, but some things would never be the same. Some words, once spoken, echo forever in the spaces between what was and what could never be again. Emma started the engine, and as we drove away from Maple Street, I realized that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is break something that was never really whole to begin with. 3 weeks had passed since that terrible dinner, and I still woke up every morning expecting to find a voicemail from Mom or a text from Dad asking me to come home. Instead, I found silence that grew heavier with each passing day. Emma's studio apartment had become my sanctuary, filled with her artwork and the scent of the vanilla candles she lit every evening to help me sleep. The morning light filtered through her gauzy curtains, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floors as I sat at her kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. The cursor blinked accusingly in the empty email draft I'd been trying to write to Jessica for the past hour. Every time I started to type, the words seemed inadequate, too small to bridge the chasm that had opened up in our family. Emma padded into the kitchen, wearing my oversized Ohio State sweatshirt, her hair tousled from sleep. She kissed the top of my head before pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs, a routine we'd developed since I'd been staying here. Her presence was the only thing keeping me anchored to the belief that I'd made the right choice. "Still trying to write to Jess?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me. I nodded, closing the laptop in frustration. "I don't know what to say. How do you explain to your little sister that your parents have basically disowned you?" Emma reached across the small table and took my hand, her thumb tracing circles on my palm the way she did when she was thinking. "Maybe you don't explain. Maybe you just tell her you miss her." The simplicity of it hit me like a revelation. I'd been overthinking everything, trying to justify my choices and defend my relationship, when all I really wanted was to maintain the connection with the one family member who'd shown me unconditional love that night. My phone buzzed with a text notification, and for a moment my heart leapt with hope. But it wasn't from Jessica or my parents. It was from my boss at the accounting firm where I'd worked since college. "Sarah, we need to talk. Please come in early today. Margaret. The formal tone sent a chill through me. Margaret Davidson had been my mentor for 3 years, guiding me through complex tax codes and client relations with the patience of a saint. She'd also been a member of my father's congregation for over a decade. "What is it?" Emma asked, reading the expression on my face. I showed her the message, and her green eyes darkened with concern. "You think your dad talked to her?" The possibility had been lurking in the back of my mind for weeks. Dad's influence in the community extended far beyond the walls of First Presbyterian Church. He served on the hospital board, the school committee, and had connections throughout Cleveland's business community. It would be naive to think he wouldn't use those connections to express his disapproval of his daughter's lifestyle choices. "I should get ready," I said, standing up from the table. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth as I realized that my personal crisis was about to spill over into my professional life. Davidson and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise with views of Lake Erie that usually calmed my nerves. Today, as I rode the elevator up, the familiar ding of each floor sounded like a countdown to disaster. I dressed carefully in my most conservative navy suit, as if the right outfit could somehow shield me from whatever was coming. Margaret's corner office smelled like the lavender tea she drank religiously, and the expensive leather of her diplomas hanging on the wall. She looked up as I knocked on her open door, and I immediately noticed the careful distance in her smile, the kind reserved for difficult clients rather than trusted employees. "Sarah, please sit down." I settled into the chair across from her desk, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Margaret was a woman in her 50s who'd built her practice through sheer determination and attention to detail. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual chignon, and her expression was unreadable behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "I'm going to cut straight to the point," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I received a call from Reverend Thompson yesterday. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known this moment might come, but the reality of it was somehow more devastating than I'd imagined. Margaret, I can explain." She held up a hand to stop me. "He expressed some concerns about your personal life and how it might affect your work here, particularly given some of our more conservative clients." I could picture the conversation perfectly. Dad sitting in his study surrounded by his theological books, speaking with the same measured authority he brought to his sermons. He would have been diplomatic, of course, couching his prejudice in terms of business concerns and community values. "My personal life has never interfered with my work," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "My performance reviews have always been excellent, and I've never had a single client complaint." "I know that, Sarah. You're one of our most dedicated employees." Margaret leaned forward, her expression softening slightly. "But I have to consider the bigger picture. We live in a conservative community, and many of our clients share certain traditional values." The euphemism hung between us like a loaded weapon. Traditional values, family values, all the coded language that meant people like me weren't welcome, weren't worth protecting, weren't deserving of the same basic human rights as everyone else. "Are you firing me?" I asked directly, needing to hear the words rather than dance around them with polite corporate speak. Margaret sighed, removing her glasses to clean them with deliberate care. "I'm giving you 2 weeks' notice. I'll provide excellent references, of course, and we'll say it was a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities." The room seemed to tilt around me. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, of studying for my CPA certification on weekends, of building relationships with clients and proving my worth through dedication and expertise. All of it reduced to my father's phone call, and the uncomfortable truth that love was still considered a liability in certain circles. "I see," I said, proud that my voice didn't break. "And if I were to end my relationship with Emma, would that change things?" The question surprised us both. I hadn't planned to ask it, hadn't even considered it as a real option, but somewhere in the desperate part of my brain that was calculating the cost of this choice, the question had emerged. Margaret's expression grew pained. "Sarah, I can't ask you to do that. I wouldn't ask you to do that." But she didn't say it would change her decision either. We both understood the unspoken truth, that my career, my financial stability, my professional reputation were all casualties in a war I hadn't chosen to fight. I gathered my purse and stood up with as much dignity as I could muster. "I'll clean out my desk this afternoon." As I walked through the office toward my cubicle, I felt the weight of every glance from my colleagues. Some looked sympathetic, others curious, a few clearly uncomfortable. Janet from payroll gave me a small, sad smile. Tom from the tax department suddenly became very interested in his computer screen, I packed my personal items methodically. The small succulent Emma had given me for my birthday, the framed photo of Jessica and me at her graduation, the coffee mug with world's okayest accountant that my work friends had bought me as a joke. Each item went into the cardboard box like evidence of a life that was being systematically dismantled. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. How did it go? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. I'll tell you when I get home. Home. The word felt strange when applied to Emma's apartment, but it was the only place that felt safe now. The only place where I could be myself, without fear of judgment or consequences. As I carried my box to the elevator, Margaret appeared beside me. Sarah, for what it's worth, I think you're brave, and I hope you find happiness. The elevator doors closed before I could respond, but her words echoed in the enclosed space. Brave. It was a word I'd never applied to myself before. I'd always thought of bravery in terms of heroic acts, grand gestures, life or death decisions. I'd never considered that sometimes bravery looks like choosing love over security, authenticity over acceptance, truth over comfort. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone had 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, and a voicemail from Jessica. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering the courage to listen to my sister's message. Her voice was barely above a whisper, clearly recorded in secret. Sarah, I can't talk long, but I needed you to know that Mom hasn't stopped crying since you left. And Dad, he's not eating, barely sleeping. He won't admit it, but I think he's realizing what he's done. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but maybe there's still hope for us to be a family again. I love you, and I'm proud of you for being true to yourself. Call me when you can. I played the message 3 times, searching for hidden meanings in Jessica's tone, looking for signs that reconciliation might be possible. But underneath my sister's hopeful words, I heard the reality of the situation. My parents were suffering too, but they were the architects of this suffering. They'd chosen their beliefs over their daughter, their prejudice over their love. The drive home through Cleveland's afternoon traffic gave me time to process the magnitude of what had just happened. In the span of 3 weeks, I'd lost my family, my job, and the financial stability I'd worked so hard to build. The only thing left was Emma, and the terrifying possibility that love alone might not be enough to sustain us through what was coming. But as I pulled into the parking lot of Emma's apartment building, I saw her waiting for me on the steps, still wearing my sweatshirt, her face creased with worry. She stood up as soon as she saw my car, and something in her posture, the way she squared her shoulders, the determined set of her jaw, told me that she was prepared to face whatever came next. I wasn't brave. I realized as I got out of the car carrying my box of former life. I was terrified, heartbroken, and completely unprepared for the challenges ahead. But I was also free in a way I'd never been before, free to love openly, to live authentically, to build a life based on my own values, rather than those imposed by others. Emma took the box from my hands without asking what had happened. She could read the answer in my expression, in the slump of my shoulders, in the way I leaned into her embrace like she was the only solid thing left in a world that had suddenly become quicksand. We'll figure it out, she whispered into my hair. Whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together. Standing there in the parking lot, holding each other against the wind that carried the first hint of winter, I believed her. I had to believe her. Because sometimes, faith isn't about trusting in divine providence or predetermined plans. Sometimes faith is about trusting that love is stronger than fear, that authenticity is worth more than acceptance, and that the family you choose can be more powerful than the family you're born into. The broken glass from that dinner table was still cutting, still drawing blood with every step forward. But Emma was right. We would figure it out together. We had to. The unemployment office on East 22nd Street smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, clutching my folder of documents while surrounded by people who, like me, were trying to rebuild their lives from unexpected rubble. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow that made even the youngest faces look tired and defeated. It had been 6 weeks since my conversation with Margaret, and the reality of my situation was settling in with the weight of concrete. The severance package from Davidson and Associates would last another month, maybe 2, if Emma and I lived on rice and beans. Every job application I'd submitted had either been ignored or met with polite rejections that felt too quick to be based solely on my qualifications. Sarah Mitchell, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, called my name from behind a desk that had seen better decades. I walked over, my heels clicking against the scuffed linoleum floor. The woman, whose nameplate read Carol Stevens, looked up at me with the expression of someone who'd heard every sob story and excuse in the book. "First time filing?" she asked, pulling up my information on her computer. "Yes, ma'am. Lost your job at an accounting firm." She scrolled through my file, her expression growing more interested. "Good references, clean employment history, CPA certification. You shouldn't have trouble finding something. If only it were that simple." I'd learned in the past month and a half that Cleveland's business community was smaller than I'd realized, and my father's influence reached further than I'd ever imagined. 3 potential employers had seemed genuinely interested in my qualifications during initial phone screenings, only to suddenly discover they'd filled the position internally after meeting with me in person. "I hope you're right," I said, signing the forms she pushed across the desk. Carol studied my face more carefully. "You know, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I can usually tell when someone's dealing with more than just bad luck. You want to talk about what's really going on?" The kindness in her voice almost broke me. For weeks, I'd been carrying the weight of my situation alone, not wanting to burden Emma with my fears about our financial future. But there was something about Carol's matter-of-fact compassion that made me want to tell the truth. "My father is Reverend Richard Thompson at First Presbyterian," I said quietly. "We had a falling out over my personal life, and I think word has gotten around." Carol's expression shifted to one of understanding mixed with anger. "Ah, that kind of falling out." She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against the desk. "You know, there's a nonprofit downtown that helps people in situations like yours. LGBTQ+ community support, job placement assistance, that sort of thing. Want me to write down their information?" The abbreviation hit me like a revelation. For weeks I'd been thinking of myself as simply someone who'd fallen in love with the wrong person, not as part of a larger community with shared experiences and mutual support systems. The idea that there were other people who'd walked this path, who'd faced similar challenges and survived them, was both comforting and intimidating. "Yes," I said. "Please." Carol wrote the information on a piece of scrap paper. "Rainbow Bridge Community Center. Ask for Michael Torres. He runs their career services program. Good guy, won't judge you. And he knows which employers in the city are genuinely inclusive versus which ones just have pretty diversity statements on their websites." I walked out of the unemployment office with more than just paperwork. I had a thread of hope and the first glimpse of a path forward that didn't involve hiding who I was or begging for acceptance from people who'd already made their feelings clear. The Rainbow Bridge Community Center occupied a converted warehouse in the Arts District, its brick exterior covered with a mural depicting hands of different colors, reaching toward a rainbow that arched over Cleveland's skyline. Inside, the space buzzed with activity, people working at computers, support groups meeting in circles of folding chairs, volunteers organizing donated clothing in the corner. Michael Torres turned out to be a man in his 30s with kind eyes and the sort of easy smile that immediately put people at ease. His office was cramped but welcoming, filled with thank you cards from people he'd helped and photos of what I assumed were success stories. "So you're dealing with family rejection and professional blacklisting," he said, after I'd told him my story. His directness was refreshing, after weeks of dancing around the truth. "Unfortunately, it's a story I hear too often. The good news is that it gets better. The challenging news is that it takes time and strategy." He pulled out a thick folder and began spreading documents across his desk. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to expand your job search beyond Cleveland. I have contacts in Columbus, Cincinnati, even Chicago, who work with companies that actively recruit LGBTQ+ talent. Second, we're going to get you connected with our support network, people who've been where you are and can help you navigate this transition." "I can't afford to move," I said. "I can barely afford to stay." "That's where our emergency assistance fund comes in," Michael replied. "We can help with moving costs, security deposits, even temporary housing if needed. The most important thing right now is getting you to a place where you can rebuild your career without your father's influence hanging over every opportunity." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe fully. The tightness in my chest that had become my constant companion began to ease as Michael outlined resources I hadn't known existed, connections I could make, paths forward I hadn't considered. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling out a business card. "We have a support group that meets every Thursday evening. People dealing with family rejection, workplace discrimination, the whole spectrum of challenges our community faces. You might find it helpful." I took the card, running my thumb over the rainbow logo. What if Emma came with me? She's been incredible through all of this, But I know it's hard for her too. Partners and allies are absolutely welcome, Michael said. In fact, we encourage it. This affects your whole chosen family, not just you. Chosen family. Another phrase that reframed my entire situation. I'd been thinking in terms of loss, the family I'd been rejected by, the career I'd been forced to abandon. But maybe it was also about gain, the family I was choosing, the life I was building according to my own values. That evening, I sat at Emma's kitchen table with my laptop, looking at job postings in cities I'd never seriously considered living in. Emma worked on a logo design for a local restaurant while we shared takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine that had been a gift from her coworker. Columbus has 3 positions that look promising, I said, highlighting listings at firms that Michael had specifically recommended. And there's one in Chicago that seems perfect. They even mention LGBTQ+ inclusive benefits in the job description. Emma looked up from her sketchpad, her expression thoughtful. How do you feel about starting over somewhere new? It was the question I'd been avoiding, even in my own mind. Cleveland had been my home for 24 years. I knew every neighborhood, every shortcut, every place that held memories. Leaving felt like another loss piled on top of all the others. But staying felt like accepting a life of limitations, of always looking over my shoulder for the next consequence of my father's disapproval. Terrified, I admitted, but also excited. Maybe it's time for a fresh start somewhere we can just be ourselves without all this history weighing us down. Emma set down her pencil and reached across the table to take my hand. Then let's do it. Let's pick a city and build our life there. No more hiding, no more apologizing for who we are. The simplicity of her support still amazed me. Emma hadn't signed up for any of this drama when we'd started dating. She could have walked away when my father issued his ultimatum, could have decided that a relationship this complicated wasn't worth the hassle. Instead, she'd stood beside me at that dinner table, slammed down her wine glass in defiance, and spent the past 2 months helping me piece together a new version of myself. Chicago, I said suddenly. The word surprised me with its certainty. It's far enough away that Dad's influence won't follow us, big enough that we can disappear into the crowd, and close enough that Jessica could visit without making it a major expedition. Emma smiled, the kind of smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, and made me remember why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. Chicago it is. We spent the rest of the evening researching neighborhoods, looking at apartment listings, mapping out the logistics of a move neither of us could really afford, but both of us desperately needed. With each website we browsed, each plan we made, I felt the heavy weight of the past few months beginning to shift. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my heart leaped with the old hope that it might be from my parents. Instead, it was from Jessica. Saw Emma's mom at the grocery store today. She told me about Chicago. I'm proud of you for not giving up. P.S. Mom asked about you yesterday. First time she said your name since dinner. Maybe there's hope after all. I showed the message to Emma, and she squeezed my hand encouragingly. See? Even if they're not ready to apologize yet, you're not forgotten. That night, as we lay in bed planning our escape to a city where we could love each other openly, I thought about the different types of courage it takes to build a life. There's the dramatic courage of standing up to bullies, the heroic courage of facing physical danger, but there's also the quiet, persistent courage of choosing hope over bitterness, of building something new instead of mourning what was lost. Emma fell asleep with her head on my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. Outside, Cleveland continued its nightly routine of late commuters and early bar crowds, unaware that 2 women in a small apartment were quietly planning their revolution. It wasn't the kind of revolution that made headlines or changed laws, but it was ours. A personal rebellion against the idea that love should come with conditions, that authenticity was a luxury we couldn't afford. In 2 weeks, I had an interview with a firm in Chicago that specialized in nonprofit accounting. Michael had made the introduction, vouching for my skills and character in ways that apparently carried weight in circles where diversity wasn't just a buzzword. Emma had already started reaching out to design firms and freelance opportunities in the city. We were really doing this. We were leaving behind everything familiar and safe to bet our futures on the radical idea that we deserved to be happy, to be ourselves, to build a family based on love rather than obligation. The broken glass from that family dinner was still cutting, still leaving scars with every step forward. But maybe scars were just proof that we'd survived something that was supposed to destroy us. Maybe they were evidence of strength rather than damage. As I drifted off to sleep, I imagined a life in Chicago, where holding Emma's hand on the street was unremarkable, where our love story was just one of thousands playing out in a city big enough to contain multitudes. It was a beautiful dream, and for the first time in months, it felt achievable. The revolution would be quiet, personal, and absolutely necessary, and it would be ours. The Greyhound bus pulled into Chicago's Union Station on a gray November morning that matched my nervous energy perfectly. Emma and I had spent the 4-hour ride from Cleveland, alternating between excited planning and terrified silence, our hands intertwined as we watched the Midwest landscape roll past the windows. Everything we owned had been crammed into 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes, a lifetime reduced to what could fit in the cargo hold of a bus. "Next stop, our new life," Emma said as we gathered our carry-on bags, her voice attempting lightness that didn't quite mask her own anxiety. Chicago hit us like a sensory overload, the echoing announcements in Union Station, the smell of coffee and exhaust, the crowd of people moving with purpose through the terminal. I'd visited the city twice for college trips, but living somewhere was entirely different from being a tourist. This wasn't a weekend adventure. This was home now, whether we succeeded or failed. Our temporary housing was a studio sublet in Rogers Park that we'd found through Rainbow Bridge's network. The previous tenant, a guy named Marcus who was moving to San Francisco, had left it furnished with mismatched furniture that somehow felt more welcoming than intimidating. The apartment was small but clean, with windows that looked out on a tree-lined street where people walked dogs and pushed strollers, like this was just another ordinary Tuesday in their lives. "It's perfect," Emma said, dropping her suitcase by the door and spinning around to take in our new space. "Look, there's even room for an easel by the window." I loved her optimism. The way she could find possibility in a 400-square-foot studio apartment that smelled faintly of the previous tenant's cooking experiments. While she explored our new home, I unpacked my interview outfit for tomorrow, the same navy suit I'd worn to my final meeting with Margaret, now pressed and ready for a second chance. Morrison & Associates nonprofit services occupied 3 floors of a renovated warehouse in the West Loop, the kind of space that somehow managed to feel both professional and creative. The exposed brick walls were covered with thank you letters from client organizations, and the reception area featured comfortable seating that looked like it belonged in someone's living room rather than a corporate lobby. Sarah Mitchell, a woman about my age with natural curls and a warm smile, approached me. "I'm Kelly Washington, senior partner. Michael Torres told us wonderful things about you." The interview process was unlike anything I'd experienced in Cleveland. Instead of the formal interrogation I'd expected, it felt more like a conversation between colleagues who were genuinely interested in finding the right fit for everyone involved. Kelly and her partner James Chen asked about my technical skills, of course, but they also wanted to know about my motivations, my values, what kind of work environment would help me thrive. We specialize in serving LGBTQ+ nonprofits and other marginalized communities, James explained as he gave me a tour of their offices. Our clients need accountants who understand that their work isn't just about numbers. It's about survival, advocacy, creating change. Does that resonate with you? The question hit deeper than he probably realized. 3 months ago, I would have given a polite, professional answer about wanting to use my skills for social good. Now, having lived through discrimination myself, having experienced the desperate need for community support systems, I understood what he meant in my bones. "It absolutely does," I said. "I've learned recently that financial stability isn't just about personal success. It's about having the resources to live authentically, to support the people you love, to contribute to causes bigger than yourself." Kelly and James exchanged a look that I recognized as approval, mixed with understanding. They'd both been where I was, I realized. They'd both faced the choice between hiding who they were and rebuilding their lives around authenticity. "When can you start?" Kelly asked. The job offer came with a salary that was slightly less than what I'd made in Cleveland, but the benefits package included health insurance that covered Emma as my domestic partner, generous PTO, and something I'd never encountered before, a professional development fund specifically designed to help employees attend LGBTQ+ business conferences and training programs. I called Emma from the lobby of the building, practically vibrating with excitement and relief. "I got it," I said as soon as she answered. "I actually got the job." "Sarah, that's amazing." I could hear the smile in her voice, the same joy and pride that had carried us through the darkest moments of the past few months. "I have news too. Remember that design firm I interviewed with yesterday? They want me to start as a freelancer next week, with the possibility of full-time if things work out." We celebrated that night at a small Italian restaurant in our neighborhood, sharing a bottle of wine and making lists of all the things we wanted to do, now that Chicago was officially home rather than just an escape plan. Emma sketched on napkins while I looked up apartments we might be able to afford once our income stabilized. For the first time since that terrible family dinner, the future felt bright rather than terrifying. "I want to call Jessica," I said, as we walked home along Sheridan Road, past apartment buildings lit up with the warm glow of other people's lives. "I want to tell her we made it, that we're building something good here." Emma squeezed my hand. "Do you think she'll tell your parents?" The question had been lurking in my mind all day. Part of me hoped Jessica would share the news, that maybe hearing about my success would soften my parents' hearts. But another part of me was terrified that any contact, even secondhand, would somehow poison this new beginning. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I miss her too much to keep worrying about what they might think." I called Jessica that night from our tiny apartment, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, while Emma painted her nails at the kitchen table. My sister answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. "Sarah, oh my God, I was just thinking about you. How's Chicago? Are you okay? Are you eating enough?" Her rapid-fire questions made me laugh, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. "I'm great, Jess. Really great. I got a job today. Emma's working. We found an apartment we love. It's like I can breathe again. I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You know that, right? I'm so proud of you for not giving up, for choosing happiness even when it was hard." We talked for an hour, catching up on her senior year of college, her plans for graduate school, the small dramas of daily life that suddenly felt precious because we could share them again. She told me about Thanksgiving preparations at home, the awkward silences that had replaced my presence at the dinner table, the way Mom still set 4 places before catching herself. "They miss you," Jessica said quietly. "They won't admit it, especially Dad, but they miss you terribly. Mom has your senior picture sitting on her nightstand now, the one from graduation. She looks at it every morning. The image of my mother studying my photograph while getting dressed each day broke something open in my chest. I'd been so focused on my own pain that I hadn't fully considered theirs, the way their rigid beliefs had trapped them in a loss they'd created, but couldn't undo without admitting they were wrong. "Maybe someday," I said, not wanting to hope too much, but unable to completely let go of the possibility. "Maybe someday," Jessica agreed. "In the meantime, I love you, and I'm proud of you, and Chicago is lucky to have you." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of our studio apartment, processing the complicated emotions that came with reconnecting to the family I'd lost while building the life I'd chosen. Emma had finished her nails and was reading on the couch, her presence both grounding and inspiring. "Good call?" she asked, looking up from her book. "Yeah," I said, joining her on the couch and curling up against her side. "Really good." That night, as we lay in our new bed in our new city, I thought about the different types of home we'd found. There was the geographical home of Chicago, with its promise of anonymity and opportunity. There was the emotional home we'd created together, built on love and mutual support, and the revolutionary idea that we deserved to be happy. And there was the potential home of a reconciled family, still fragile and uncertain, but flickering with possibility. The broken glass from that family dinner had left scars, but we'd learned to dance around the sharp edges. We'd built something beautiful from the ruins of what we'd lost, something that belonged entirely to us. Chicago stretched out beyond our windows, a city of 8 million stories where ours was just beginning to unfold. In the morning, I would start my new job helping nonprofits manage their finances so they could focus on changing the world. Emma would begin building her client base in a city that appreciated creativity and diversity. We would grocery shop and do laundry and argue about what to watch on Netflix, the mundane activities of a life we'd chosen rather than inherited. The revolution had been quiet, personal, and absolutely necessary, and we were winning. Spring came to Chicago like a promise being kept, transforming the city from the gray, wind-battered landscape of winter into something green and hopeful. Emma and I had been in the city for 6 months, long enough for the novelty to wear off and the reality of building a life to set in. Our studio apartment had evolved from a temporary shelter into an actual home, filled with Emma's artwork and the small treasures we'd collected from exploring our adopted city. The job at Morrison & Associates had exceeded every expectation I dared to have. Working with nonprofits meant that every spreadsheet, every budget analysis, every financial report directly contributed to causes I believed in: LGBTQ+ youth shelters, immigrant services, environmental advocacy groups. Kelly and James had become more than bosses. They were mentors who understood the intersection of professional success and personal authenticity in ways my previous employers never could. "Sarah, can you stay for a few minutes after the staff meeting?" Kelly asked, as everyone began packing up their laptops. It was our monthly all-hands gathering, where we reviewed client wins, discussed challenges, and celebrated the small victories that kept nonprofit work sustainable. I nodded, a flutter of anxiety mixing with curiosity. Performance reviews weren't scheduled for another month, and I couldn't think of any mistakes that might warrant a private conversation. After the others left, Kelly poured 2 cups of coffee from the perpetual pot that kept our office running and settled into the chair across from mine. "How are you feeling about the work?" she asked, her tone more conversational than professional. "I love it," I said, and meant it completely. It's exactly what I didn't know I was looking for. "Good, because James and I have been talking, and we'd like to offer you a promotion. Senior associate, with a focus on developing our LGBTQ+ nonprofit portfolio. It would mean more responsibility, more client contact, and obviously a salary increase." The offer hit me like sunshine after a long winter. 6 months ago, I'd been unemployed and heartbroken, wondering if my career was over before it had really begun. Now, I was being offered not just job security, but a chance to specialize in work that felt like a calling rather than just a paycheck. "There's one catch," Kelly continued, smiling at my stunned expression. "The role would require some travel, conferences, on-site visits with clients, that sort of thing. We know you and Emma are still getting settled, so we wanted to make sure that would work for your situation." "It would absolutely work," I said, probably too quickly. "I mean, I'd need to discuss it with Emma, but yes, I'm very interested." That evening, I practically floated home to our apartment, stopping at the corner market to buy flowers and the ingredients for Emma's favorite pasta dish. I found her in our living room, which she'd converted into an art studio during the day, working on a series of paintings that captured Chicago's architectural diversity through seasons and weather. "You look like you won the lottery," she said, wiping paint from her hands with a rag that had seen better years. "Better," I said, kissing her before launching into the details of Kelly's offer. Emma listened with the focused attention she brought to everything important, asking questions about the travel schedule and the new responsibilities. "I'm so proud of you," she said when I finished explaining. 6 months ago, we thought your career was over, and now you're being offered a promotion that's perfect for who you are." I corrected. "We're being offered this opportunity. I couldn't have done any of this without you." It was true in ways that went beyond emotional support. Emma's freelance design work had stabilized to the point where she was earning almost as much as I was, and her artistic eye had helped me present financial reports and presentations that stood out from the typical boring spreadsheets. More importantly, her unwavering belief in our future had carried me through the moments when I doubted whether we'd made the right choice. "There's something else," I said, suddenly nervous about the other conversation I'd been avoiding. "Jessica called yesterday while you were at your client meeting." Emma's expression grew more serious. My sister had been our primary connection to Cleveland, providing updates on our parents' well-being while carefully avoiding any pressure for reconciliation. Her calls had become a lifeline and a source of complicated emotions. "They're coming to Chicago," I said. "Mom and Dad. There's a pastors' conference downtown next month, and they'll be here for 4 days." Emma sat down heavily on our couch, processing the implications. "Do they know we're here?" "Jessica hasn't told them, but..." I joined her on the couch, taking her hands in mine. "She thinks it might be time. She thinks maybe they're ready to at least try." The possibility had been haunting me since Jessica's call. For 6 months, I'd been building a life that didn't include my parents, learning to navigate holidays and milestones without their presence. I'd convinced myself that I was fine with their absence, that Emma and our chosen family in Chicago were enough. But the truth was more complicated. I missed them terribly. Missed my dad's terrible jokes, and the way he got excited about obscure theological debates. Missed my mom's hugs that could fix almost anything and her ability to make any house feel like home. I missed being someone's daughter, belonging to something larger than just Emma and me. "What do you want to do?" Emma asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I want to see them," I admitted. "I want to show them that I'm happy, that we're building something good here. I want them to meet you properly, not as someone they're trying to reject, but as the person I love." Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring at the painting she'd been working on, a view of Lake Michigan from our neighborhood beach, all blues and grays, and the promise of horizon. I want that too, she said finally. But I also want to protect what we've built here. I don't want their judgment to poison this life we've created. It was the balance we'd been navigating for months, staying open to the possibility of reconciliation while refusing to compromise the authenticity we'd fought so hard to achieve. We weren't the same people who'd walked out of that family dinner 7 months ago. We'd been tested and scarred and ultimately strengthened by everything we'd survived. What if we meet them on our terms this time? I suggested. Not in their space, where they hold all the power, but here, in our city, in our life. Over the next few days, we crafted a careful plan. I would call my parents directly, not going through Jessica as an intermediary. I would tell them about my new job, our apartment, the life we'd built. I would invite them to dinner at our place, giving them the choice to accept us as we were or to walk away again. The phone call to my father was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. His voice was stiff and formal when he answered, but I could hear something underneath it. Surprise, maybe hope, definitely pain. Dad, it's Sarah. A long pause. Sarah, I heard you're coming to Chicago for a conference. I was hoping you and Mom might want to see me while you're here. Another pause. Longer this time. Your mother would like that very much. Not, we would like that, or I would like that, but the careful distinction that told me he was still struggling with his own beliefs even as he acknowledged Mom's needs. It wasn't perfect, but it was a crack in the wall that had separated us for so long. I'd like you to meet Emma properly, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. She's important to me, and I'd like you to understand why. Sarah, Dad's voice carried a warning, the same tone he'd used when I was a teenager testing boundaries. I'm not asking you to approve of my choices, I said quickly. I'm asking you to respect that they're mine to make. I'm asking you to see that I'm happy, that I'm building a good life with someone who loves me. The silence stretched between Cleveland and Chicago, carrying 7 months of pain and hope, and the desperate need for family that neither distance nor ideology could completely erase. We'll be staying at the Palmer House, he said finally. Perhaps we could meet for coffee. It wasn't the dinner invitation I'd extended, but it was something. A neutral location, a time limit, an escape route if things went badly. But it was also acknowledgement, contact, the first step toward whatever came next. Saturday morning? I suggested. There's a cafe near your hotel that makes excellent coffee. Saturday morning, he agreed. After we hung up, I sat in our quiet apartment for a long time, processing what had just happened. Emma found me there when she returned from a client meeting, still holding the phone like it might ring again with news that the conversation had been a dream. How did it go? She asked, settling beside me on the couch. They'll see us, I said. Coffee on Saturday, both of them. Emma nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension that perfectly matched my own feelings. We both understood that this meeting could go anywhere, from tentative reconciliation to a final, definitive goodbye. But we also understood that the risk was worth taking, that the possibility of healing was worth the vulnerability it required. That night, as we lay in bed listening to the sounds of Chicago outside our window, I thought about the different kinds of courage it takes to maintain hope. There's the courage to leave, which we'd already proven we possessed. But there's also the courage to stay open to return, to forgive, to risk your heart again after it's been broken by the people who were supposed to protect it. In 3 days, I would sit across from my parents in a coffee shop and try to bridge a gap that had seemed unbridgeable. I would introduce them to the woman I loved and ask them to see her as I did, as someone deserving of respect, acceptance, love. I would show them the life I'd built from the ruins of their rejection and hope they could find pride in my resilience rather than shame in my choices. The outcome was uncertain, but the attempt felt necessary. Sometimes growing roots means learning to bend without breaking, to extend yourself toward the light, while staying grounded in the soil that nourishes you. Chicago had taught us both, Emma and me, that home could be chosen as well as inherited. Now, we would discover whether family could be rebuilt, as well as lost. The coffee shop on State Street buzzed with the typical Saturday morning energy of a city coming alive after the work week. I sat at a corner table, my hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, watching the door for my parents' arrival. Emma sat beside me, projecting calm confidence while I knew she was as nervous as I was. She dressed carefully in dark jeans and a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, looking approachable, but not trying too hard to impress. At exactly 10 o'clock, I saw them through the window, Dad in his navy suit that he wore to every important occasion. Mom in the floral dress that had been her favorite for years. They looked older somehow. Dad's hair grayer at the temples, Mom moving with less of the energetic purpose I remembered. But they also looked like themselves, like the people who'd raised me and loved me before everything became complicated. They paused outside the coffee shop, and I watched Dad take Mom's hand in a gesture that looked both protective and supportive. Then they pushed through the door, scanning the crowded space until Mom's eyes found mine. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the busy cafe, 8 months of separation and pain and stubborn love suspended in the space between us. Then Mom smiled, tentative, uncertain, but genuine, and I felt something tight in my chest finally begin to loosen. I stood as they approached our table, my legs unsteady beneath me. "Mom, Dad, Sarah," Mom said, and her voice broke slightly on my name. She looked at Emma, then back at me, clearly struggling with the etiquette of a situation she'd never imagined herself in. "Mom, Dad, this is Emma," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Emma, these are my parents, Richard and Linda Thompson." Emma stood and extended her hand to Dad first, meeting his eyes directly. "Mr. Thompson, it's nice to finally meet you properly." Dad hesitated for just a moment before taking her hand, his pastoral training overriding whatever personal reservations he might have had. "Emma." Mom was next, and her handshake lasted a beat longer, her eyes studying Emma's face with the intensity of someone trying to understand a puzzle. "Please, sit," I said, gesturing to the chairs across from us. "Can I get you coffee? They have excellent pastries, too." The next few minutes were filled with the careful choreography of getting settled. Dad ordering black coffee, Mom requesting tea with honey, Emma offering to go to the counter, the small negotiations that gave us all time to adjust to being in the same space again. When Emma returned with their drinks, an uncomfortable silence settled over our table. Conversations buzzed around us, but our corner felt isolated, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. "You look well," Mom said finally, her eyes taking in my face, my hair, searching for signs of how I'd been living these past months. "I am well," I replied. "We both are. Chicago has been good to us." Dad cleared his throat, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug like an anchor. "Jessica tells us you found employment." "I did. I'm working for a nonprofit accounting firm. We help organizations that serve marginalized communities manage their finances so they can focus on their missions." I paused, watching his face for reaction. "It's meaningful work." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom said, and the endearment slipped out before she could stop it. Her eyes immediately went to Dad, as if checking whether she'd overstepped some boundary they'd established. Emma spoke for the first time since the introductions. "Sarah's been promoted to senior associate. She's building their LGBTQ+ nonprofit division." The acronym hung in the air like a challenge. Dad's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he didn't look away from Emma's steady gaze. "That's quite an accomplishment," he said carefully, "in such a short time." "She's brilliant at what she does," Emma continued. "Her clients trust her because she understands their struggles personally. She's not just managing their books, she's helping them survive and thrive." I could see Mom processing Emma's words, the way she spoke about me with such obvious pride and affection. This wasn't the predatory seductress from Dad's worst fears, but someone who clearly cherished me, who saw my success as her own victory. "What about you, Emma?" Mom asked quietly. "What do you do?" "I'm a graphic designer. I work with small businesses mostly, helping them develop their visual identity. I've been building my client base here. Chicago has a wonderful creative community." "Emma's incredibly talented," I added. "She did the logo for the coffee shop where we met, actually." Mom's eyes widened slightly. "The one with the rainbow?" Emma nodded. "The owner wanted something that would signal inclusivity, while still feeling warm and approachable. It was one of my favorite projects." Dad studied the coffee shop around us, as if seeing it for the first time, taking in the diverse crowd of customers, the community bulletin board covered with flyers for art shows and support groups, the general atmosphere of acceptance that had drawn Emma and me here in the first place. "Sarah," he said, his voice quieter than before, "are you happy?" The question caught me off guard, with its simplicity and directness. I'd prepared for arguments about morality, about scripture, about the choices I'd made. I hadn't expected him to ask about happiness. "Yes," I said, reaching for Emma's hand on the table. "I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm living authentically, doing work that matters, loving someone who loves me back completely. I wake up grateful every day." Dad's eyes followed the gesture, watching our intertwined fingers with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mom was crying quietly now, tears streaming down her face as she looked at us. "I've missed you so much," she whispered. "Every day, Sarah. Every single day. I've missed you too, Mom. Both of you. Your mother has been—" Dad paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "She's been very sad. We both have. The house feels empty without your voice. Your laughter. I didn't think you wanted my voice anymore," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my tone. Dad was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee as if it held answers to questions he'd been wrestling with for months. "I said things I shouldn't have said," he admitted finally. "In anger, in fear. I was trying to protect what I thought was right for you, but I ended up driving you away instead. You said I wasn't your daughter anymore," I reminded him gently. "That's not something you take back easily. You are my daughter," he said, looking up to meet my eyes directly. "You will always be my daughter. I may not understand all of your choices. I may struggle with reconciling them with my beliefs, but that doesn't change the fact that I love you." Emma squeezed my hand as I felt tears starting to blur my vision. This wasn't the complete acceptance I'd dreamed of, but it was acknowledgement. It was love. It was a door opening instead of slamming shut. "Can you try to understand Emma's place in my life?" I asked. "Can you see that she makes me better? That she's not taking me away from you, but helping me become who I'm supposed to be?" Dad looked at Emma for a long moment, really looked at her, as if seeing her as a person rather than a symbol of everything he feared. "I can see that she loves you," he said quietly. "I can see that you love her. I may need time to fully understand what that means, but I can see it." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that I would never try to come between Sarah and her family. I know how much you all mean to her. I want to be part of expanding that love, not replacing it." Mom reached across the table suddenly, covering our joined hands with both of hers. "Then you're welcome in our family," she said firmly, looking at Dad as if daring him to contradict her. "Anyone who loves our daughter the way you clearly do is welcome." Dad was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Linda's right. We may have a lot to learn, a lot to work through. But, yes, you're welcome." We talked for another hour, catching up on months of separation, sharing stories about Chicago and Cleveland, beginning the careful work of rebuilding bridges that had been burned. It wasn't perfect. There were still uncomfortable pauses, still moments when Dad's discomfort showed through his effort to be accepting. But it was real, honest, and hopeful in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. As we prepared to leave, Mom hugged me tightly, the kind of hug I'd been missing for 8 months. "Come home for Christmas," she whispered in my ear. "Both of you. Come home." Dad shook Emma's hand again, longer this time, with more warmth. "Take care of her," he said. "Always," Emma replied. We walked out of the coffee shop together, standing on the sidewalk in the crisp October air. Chicago bustled around us, indifferent to the small miracle of reconciliation that had just taken place over coffee and pastries. "This is a beautiful city," Mom said, looking around at the architecture, the diverse crowd of pedestrians, the energy of urban life. "It is," I agreed. "It's given us everything we needed to become ourselves. Maybe you could show us more of it," Dad suggested tentatively, "before we fly back tomorrow, if you have time." Emma and I spent the rest of the day giving my parents a tour of our Chicago, the lakefront where we walked every evening, the neighborhood market where everyone knew our names, the art gallery that had featured Emma's work in a group show. We had dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant, where the owner made a fuss over my parents, and Emma charmed them with stories about her latest design projects. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still conversations we weren't ready to have, but it was a beginning, a foundation we could build on. Most importantly, it was honest. No one was pretending to feel things they didn't, but everyone was trying to find common ground in love. That night, after we'd said goodbye at their hotel with promises to call more often, Emma and I walked home along the lakefront. The city lights reflected on the water, and the October wind carried the promise of winter, but also the possibility of seasons changing, life continuing, hope persisting even after the darkest moments. "How do you feel?" Emma asked as we climbed the stairs to our apartment. "Like I can breathe all the way down to my toes," I said. "Like maybe we really can have it all. Our life here, our love, and some version of family too." "Your mom invited us for Christmas," Emma said, keys jingling as she unlocked our door. "She did. How do you feel about that?" Emma smiled, the same smile that had made me fall in love with her. that had given me the courage to choose authenticity over acceptance, truth over comfort. "I think it's time to go home for Christmas," she said. All of us, together. Inside our apartment, surrounded by the life we'd built from nothing but love and determination, I realized that the broken glass from that family dinner had finally stopped cutting. The scars would always be there, evidence of what we'd survived, but they were healing now, becoming part of our story, rather than the end of it. Emma was right. It was time to go home for Christmas. Not as the defeated daughter returning in shame, but as a woman who'd found herself in the wreckage of rejection and built something beautiful from the pieces. Not as someone begging for acceptance, but as someone offering the gift of inclusion to people she loved enough to keep loving even when it hurt. The revolution had been quiet and personal and absolutely necessary, and we had won, not by defeating anyone, but by refusing to let fear defeat us. We had chosen love over comfort, authenticity over approval, hope over bitterness. We had chosen each other and ourselves, and somehow, miraculously, we were getting to choose family too. Outside our windows, Chicago settled into another night, a city of millions of stories where ours was just one thread in the vast tapestry of human experience. But it was our thread, bright and strong and unbroken, woven with the colors of love and courage and the radical belief that everyone deserves to be happy, to be themselves, to come home. The glass had been broken, but we had learned to make mosaics from the pieces, and they were beautiful.